Welcome to ISA PG's section. We have 10 papers. To judge these papers, we have with us Dr. Nibedita Pani, Dr. Kannan M, Dr. Sudesh Kannan, Dr. Vandana Mangal. Participants and judges, kindly note, for presentation, the presenter will get 7 minutes. I repeat, 7 minutes and 2 minutes for Q&A. At the 6th minute of your presentation, you will get a voice alert saying 1 minute left. After the 7th minute of your presentation, your audio will be muted. I repeat, participants, you have time 7 minutes for presentation, 2 minutes for Q&A. Let us start the first paper presentation of ISA WebCon Kerala 2020. It's by Dr. Anu Jose. Dr. Anu Jose.
Yes. Good morning. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes. Over to Dr. Anu Jose. You can share your screen. Go to the presentation mode.
Is it seen now?
Slideshow.
Slideshow is visible, right?
Slideshow.
Actually, I'm sharing it. You are not seeing it?
Yes.
It's
and
changing,
your time
right?
starts. And your time starts now.
Good morning. My study is on dexmedetomidine lignocaine infusion compared to morphine for intraoperative hemodynamic stability in modified radical mastectomy. The conventional opioid-based general anesthesia has well-recognized side effects like post-operative hyperalgesia, respiratory depression, immunosuppression, and delayed recovery. In recent times, there has been a move towards non-opioid analgesic-based anesthesia as it can achieve the goals of hypnosis with amnesia and sympathetic stability without the adverse effects of opioids. Many agents like dexmedetomidine, lignocaine, ketamine, and magnesium sulfate have been tried for this purpose in various combinations. We chose a combination of dexmedetomidine and lignocaine. Aim of our study was to compare the efficacy of opioid-free anesthesia using dexmedetomidine lignocaine infusion and opioid-based anesthesia with regards to intraoperative hemodynamic stability, anesthetic requirements, awareness, and recovery profile. Primary objective was intraoperative hemodynamics in the form of heart rate, systolic, diastolic, and mean arterial blood pressure. Secondary objectives were intraoperative anesthetic requirements, recovery profile, and awareness. Methodology. This is a prospective observational cohort study done from 2018 to 2020. After obtaining institutional research and ethical committee clearance, 120 patients scheduled for modified radical mastectomy were selected after informed consent. Patients of ASA 1 to 2, 18 to 65 years of age with BMI 18 to 30 were included. Exclusion criteria were pregnant and breastfeeding, patients on beta blockers, those with AV nodal block or autonomic dysfunction, those with chronic pain on opioids or other analgesics, and history of allergy to study drugs. Sample size was calculated based on a similar study by Chavin et al. Using this formula, and we got sample size of 60 in each group to get a power of 80% and alpha error of 1.96. On arrival to the operation theatre, standard monitors were applied and GA protocol followed. GA was induced with propofol slow IV until loss of response to verbal command and intubated under succinylcholine and maintained with propofol infusion 3 to 6 mg per kilogram per hour. Group DL received opioid-free analgesia with dexmedetomidine 1 mg per kg loading dose slowly over 10 minutes prior to induction, and lignocaine 1.5 mg per kilogram bolus before intubation. And maintenance with dexmedetomidine 0.5 mg per kg per hour and lignocaine 1.5 mg per kg per hour IV infusion. In group MN or opioid group, morphine 0.15 mg per kilogram was given IV before induction of GL. Intraoperatively, all vitals and this value were monitored before induction, then 3-minute, 5-minute, and 10-minute intervals. Dexmed lignocaine infusion in group DL was kept constant throughout, and propofol infusion was adjusted to maintain this of 40 to 60. If heart rate or BP became more than 20% of baseline, despite this being 40 to 60, then it was managed with supplemental fentanyl 1 mg per kg IV. Bradycardia or hypotension were managed with atropine and ephedrine boluses. All infusions were stopped at the time of skin closure, which is taken as time 0, and patient was extubated when the patient achieved a regular spontaneous breathing pattern and was able to follow commands. And extubation time is the time to stop, time from stoppage of infusion to tracheal extubation. Ramsey sedation score was used to assess the level of sedation on arrival to PSCU. Early recovery time is the time to achieve modified Rayleigh score of 9, and delayed recovery time was the time to achieve score 9 in post-anesthetic discharge scoring system. Any intra-op awareness was assessed using modified Bryce questionnaire at 24 hours. Post-op complications were noted for 24 hours in post-operative ICU. Overall patient satisfaction was scored on Likert scale at 24 hours. These are the modified Albert pads and Bryce questionnaires used. Data was analyzed with STATA version 14 software. Qualitative variables were analyzed with proportions and chi-square test, and quantitative with student t-test, Mann-Whitney test, and Kaplan-Meier survival analysis curve. P-value less than 0.05 is taken as statistically significant. Results: demographic parameters, age, BMI, and ASA class were comparable. Mean heart rate was found to be lower in DL group throughout, but not statistically significant. Any significant fluctuation in heart rate, that is 20% from baseline, was analyzed with Kaplan-Meier survival analysis curve, which demonstrated a hazard ratio of 1.39 with 95% confidence interval 0.92 to 2.09, and this was not statistically significant. P was 0.113. And mean arterial blood pressure was found to be stable throughout the surgery in both groups, and occurrence of any episode of MAP fluctuation was similar across both groups as analyzed with Kaplan-Meier curve, and P was not significant, it was 0.909. And mean systolic and diastolic blood pressures were also comparable in both groups. Mean propofol requirement, both induction as well as maintenance dose were significantly lower in DL group, P less than 0.001. Recovery profile, mean extubation time and median Ramsey sedation score were significantly higher in morphine group, P less than 0.05. Early recovery time to achieve Aldred 9 and delayed recovery time to achieve PADS 9 were significantly lower in DL group, P less than 0.001. So recovery profile is significantly better in DL group. Awareness, none of the participants in either group had recall or awareness as assessed with Bryce questionnaire at 24 hours. Post-operative complications, bradycardia was noted in 2 patients in DL group. In morphine group, 4 had vomiting and 1 had agitation. Satisfaction score was significantly higher in DL group, P less than 0.001. Discussion. This study was done to explore the possibility of non-opioid analgesic-based technique using dexmedetomidine lignocaine in breast cancer surgeries. In our study, both groups had comparable intraoperative hemodynamic stability. DL group had significantly lower propofol requirement. Recovery profile was favorable in DL group with no incidence of post-op complications like vomiting. None had recall or intraoperative awareness in either group. DL group
1 minute left. 1 minute left.
DL group patients had better satisfaction score. The studies that have been published are few, and the findings are coherent with most of it. Bhardwaj et al. In 2019 compared opioid and opioid-free anesthesia using dexmed, lignocaine, ketamine, and there was no difference in hemodynamic outcomes. And Elsa et al. Observed that OFA using dexmed, lignocaine, and magnesium sulfate provides intraoperative hemodynamic stability without significant adverse effects. To conclude, opioid-free anesthesia with dexmedetomidine lignocaine infusion offered adequate hemodynamic stability, lower anesthetic requirements, and better recovery profile in patients undergoing breast cancer surgeries compared to opioid-based anesthesia. Limitations are non-randomized study, small sample size, single-center design, recall and awareness could not be compared due to 0 incidence. Thank you.
Over to judges.
What was your hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
What was your rescue analgesia for these patients?
Sir, it was fentanyl, 1 mg per kg. Actually, 2 patients needed fentanyl because they developed some MAP of 140 with their baseline 90. But when analyzed statistically, it was not significant.
In which group? In which
so
group?
It is not. In dexmed lignocaine group, 2 patients In dexmedetomidine group, 2 patients developed hypertension, and so we gave 80 mics fentanyl, that's 1 mics per kg for those patients. And no episode of bradycardia or hypotension were there.
Thank you.
I
Thank
ask you one question. You
Yes,
have said
ma'am.
that in the DL group there is less vomiting. What is the reason behind this?
This is dexmedetomidine group is we did it as an opioid-free group. So this post-op nausea vomiting is more common with opioids. So this is an opioid-free group, and because of the
When you have explained that there is less vomiting in this group, you have to justify also why there is vomiting in the discussion part. For this reason, okay.
Okay, ma'am. I think this is a merit of opioid-free anesthesia.
Yeah, so have you given these infusions of Dexam? How did you give the infusion? What device did you use to give the infusion?
I used an infusion pump, madam, and syringe with syringe pump.
And so you used 2 pumps or a single
ma'am.
pump too? You
2
used
pumps,
2
ma'am.
pumps.
Yes,
2
for
pumps.
propofol infusion and dexmedetomidine was taken.
So you used 3 pumps?
No, ma'am. Actually, dexmedetomidine was taken in a single syringe with 100 mics dexmed and 15 ml Silocac and 5 ml saline, and it was run at if it is a 50 kg patient, then I kept it as 5 ml per hour. So that was calculated and given. The combined dosage was calculated and given. So 2 pumps only were needed.
2 pumps. And what was the total amount of propofol that you used in either of the group, the mean amount of propofol that you used in both the groups? No, I'm not asking about the statistical relevance. I'm asking about that you already mentioned. I wanted to understand what was the total amount of propofol consumed in both the groups, the mean value.
The mean value was 1.19 milligram per kg per hour for induction, milligram per kg for induction in DL group, and for maintenance it was 3.3 milligram per kg per hour for DL group and 4.4 milligram per kg per hour for the morphine group. So
it was roughly a difference of 0.8 milligram per kilogram per hour. Do I get it right?
No, difference
for maintenance?
1.1 milligram per kg per hour difference. 3.3 and 4.4.
1.1.
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, all the judges. Thank you, Anu.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all.
Next, we have with us Dr. Safa. Suresh sir?
Yeah. Yes.
Some disturbance. Dr. Safa, go to the presentation mode and your time starts. Unmute yourself.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. And your time starts now.
A very good morning to all of you. Respected judges, in this era of COVID-19 pandemic, cough during extubation, which is an aerosol generating procedure, definitely poses a great risk over the attending anesthesiologist and the theater staff. The World Health Organization has already approved that aerosols containing COVID-19 particles can infect the attending anesthesiologist. Myself, Dr. Safa Kunin, hereby today present before you my paper on the effect of dexmedetomidine in suppressing cough during extubation of trachea after thyroidectomy. In the current scenario of increasing COVID-19 rates among the healthcare workers working with limited personal protective equipments and limited availability of negative pressure operation theaters, my study was in fact the need of the hour. The aim of my study was to determine the antitussive property of the alpha-2 adrenergic receptor agonist dexmedetomidine while extubating post-thyroidectomy patients as compared to those who did not receive dexmedetomidine. The primary objective of my study was to determine the extubation quality score by Guler-G et al. Score 1, no coughing. Score 2, minimal coughing, that is 1 or 2 times coughing. Score 3, moderate coughing. Score 4, severe coughing. Score 5, poor extubation due to coughing more than 10 times. My secondary objectives were to determine the mean postoperative sedation by the help of modified Wilson sedation score at appropriate intervals. Oriented, drowsy, arousable, and unarousable. My other secondary objectives were to determine the hemodynamic stress response to extubation, that is, assessing the heart rate, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and mean arterial blood pressure post-extubation. Also, to observe the occurrence of any complications like delayed post-op recovery, respiratory depression, hypotension, bradycardia, post-op hemorrhage, etc. But why dexmedetomidine? This imidazole compound with highly selective alpha-2 agonist activity acts on the locus ceruleus of the pons, causing conscious sedation and anxiolysis. It acts on the substantia gelatinosa of the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, causing analgesia. It inhibits the central sympathetic outflow, causing hypotension and bradycardia. And also, it depresses the gag reflex and improves the tracheal tolerance, causing cough suppression. It also acts on the peripheral alpha-2b receptors of the vascular smooth muscle, causing hypertensive, decongestant, and anti-sialagogue effects. It inhibits the antidiuretic hormone, causing diuresis, and also it causes agonism of alpha-2b receptors in the hypothalamus, causing anti-shivering action. Thus, dexmedetomidine possesses innumerable number of clinical effects, making it the real wonder drug. My study was that of a prospective, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical study on American Society of Anesthesiologists PS1 and 2 patients of either gender aged 20 to 60 years posted for thyroid surgery at KMCT Medical College, Calicut, during the 6 months period from April 2020 to September 2020. Those patients with sinus bradycardia, coronary artery disease, or second or third degree heart blocks were excluded from the study. The sample size was calculated with this formula. Randomization details. We obtained the approval of Institutional Research Committee, Institutional Ethics Committee, and consent from the patient. Randomization was done using the computer-generated random number table method. All the patients were divided into 2 groups, dexmedetomidine group, group D, and normal saline group, group N. Dexmedetomidine group received 0.75 microgram per kilogram of dexmedetomidine in 100 ml normal saline over 20 minutes at the start of induction in a double-blind manner. Group N patients received plain 100 ml normal saline over 20 minutes in a similar manner. The anesthesia techniques were standardized, and statistical analysis was done using SPSS 21 software. At the end of the study, we found out that 97.2% of the patients, that is 48.6 plus 48.6% of patients which belong to the Dexmed group had smooth recovery from anesthesia, that is smooth extubation, and none of them coughed severely, whereas only 54.3% of the patients in group N had smooth extubation, whereas 45.8% of them showed poor quality extubation. This graph also depicts the same picture, that is the group D, which is depicted in blue color, is more towards the lower scores giving smooth extubation, and group N, which is depicted by the red graph, is more towards the higher scores giving poor quality of extubation. Now coming to the secondary objectives, we found out that group D patients showed more stable heart rates during extubation, Also, they showed more stable blood pressures during extubation when compared to the normal saline group, which showed drastic variations in heart rate and blood pressure during extubation. Also, we found out that the sedation scores were comparable between the two groups. And also, there were no major intraoperative or postoperative complications in either groups. Thus, we recommend that dexmedetomidine can be used as an agent for smooth emergence from general anesthesia, thus decreasing aerosol generation in the theater and thereby decreasing infection rate. We also can recommend dexmedetomidine for the attenuation of hemodynamic stress response to extubation of trachea. Dexmedetomidine can also be used in the setting of non-operating room anesthesia and for sedation in the intensive care units. Administration
1 minute left. 1 minute left.
Is recommended at the time of induction to prevent delay in the post-op recovery. Limitations of my study was small sample size, short duration of study, single dose of the drug, and single timing of administration. Thus, we conclude that dexmedetomidine at the time of induction of general anesthesia is advantageous because it decreases the incidence of post-extubation cough and subsequent aerosol generation in the theater, with the added advantage of stable hemodynamics, optimal post-op sedation, and post-operative analgesia. These were my references. Thank you.
Doctor,
Yes, ma'am.
can you just tell me how you have done the double-blind method here?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, my co-guide helped me in loading the drug. I was blinded, my patients were blinded, but my co-guide did the procedure for me. He was given the drug and he loaded the drug in 100 ml normal saline. And in the morning of the surgery, using the computer-generated random number table method, he himself assigned patients into D group and N group. And at the start of induction, he himself, when the anesthesia technician was inducing the patient with propofol 2 milligram per kilogram, he administered either the placebo or the dexmedetomidine according to the random number table method to the patient via an infusion pump.
Okay.
And at the end of the surgery, we assessed for the extubation quality score, sedation score, hemodynamics, as well as occurrence
Who
of
has
any.
taken the parameter studies?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Who has taken down all the parameters that has come out? Blood pressure, who has monitored all these things?
Me myself, ma'am.
You have said that this during the COVID era, this method is helpful. Do you think in the COVID era, dexmedetomidine in all patients can you give?
Ma'am, I am suggesting that it is advisable that we can use it so as to decrease the rate of aerosol production in the theater. That's all, ma'am.
What is the role of dexmedetomidine in this COVID patient? Have you taken any study?
COVID patient, ma'am?
Yes. Suppose a COVID patient has come for appendicitis operation.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you give the dexmedetomidine, and what is its dose and other parameters should you read or should you taken into consideration or not?
No, ma'am. I haven't given anesthesia for COVID-19 patients with dexmedetomidine. No, ma'am.
Over to Mandana.
Dr. Safa,
Yes, sir.
most of the surgeons at the end of the surgery, they are fond of looking into the vocal cords,
Yes, sir.
whether they are moving and things like that. In that case, the patient used to cough violently. How do you manage such situation in these patients?
Yes, sir. We actually found that while they are looking at post-operatively, those patients, due to their conscious cooperative sedation, the gag reflex suppression by this drug was really effective in suppressing cough during that period.
What my question is, at the time of extubation,
Yes,
many of the surgeons used to have a look into the vocal cord and you have to show them the vocal cord and things like that. And they are anxious to see the vocal cord. Such situation, definitely the patients will be coughing. Will you deny such examination or do you continue to show this vocal cord to the surgeon? That
No,
is
sir,
my
I
question.
won't deny such examination because that is the surgeon's preference whether to examine or not. But I will maximum try to suppress the aerosol generation in the theater because even the surgeon is at
So
risk.
you used to say no for looking back.
And judges, please note we are running out of the time.
Yes. What is your answer? Be short. Whether you allow them to see the vocal cord or you don't
Yes,
allow
I will
them.
allow them, sir. I will allow them
In that
definitely.
case, most of them will cough. It's the most irritating part of the surgery or procedure.
Sir, pardon me. They will.
Most of them will cough out because at the time when you will do a laryngoscopy again.
Yes.
And I was just wondering whether you allow them to see the vocal cord or not. You yourself should.
Yes, I will definitely allow, but due to my administration of dexmedetomidine, I am really confident that I will be able to decrease the amount of coughing in that patient. That's why I will allow them, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank Let's move to the next talk. We have with us Dr. Sona. Sona. Dr. Sona.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you can share your presentation.
Okay, ma'am.
Presentation mode. And your time starts now.
Good morning to all. I am Dr. Sona Bharathan, third year postgraduate resident from MRC Medical College Hospital, Kolanjeri. Today I am going to present my study, the comparison between nalbuphine and fentanyl as administered intrathecal bupivacaine in patients undergoing infraumbilical surgeries, a prospective randomized control study. Spinal anesthesia can be safely used for infraumbilical surgeries because of avoiding airway manipulation and use of polypharmacy. And commonly used drug for spinal anesthesia is 0.5% hyperbaric bupivacaine, and which usually give a duration of 2.5 hours to 3 hours. So the surgeries which require longer duration of anesthesia, we commonly add adjuvants to enhance the duration of action. Among these adjuvants, commonly used ones are opioids. And fentanyl is one type of opioid, which is a mu receptor agonist, whereas nalbuphine is another type of opioid, which is a kappa receptor agonist and mu receptor antagonist. Being a mu receptor antagonistic property, it has less mu-mediated adverse effects like nausea, vomiting, pruritus, respiratory depression, etc. And when compared to fentanyl, it has less abuse potential. And for the use of nalbuphine, we don't need any narcotic licensing. So with this, we decided to compare fentanyl and nalbuphine as an adjuvant to intrathecal bupivacaine in patients undergoing infraumbilical surgeries using spinal anesthesia. The primary objective of our study is to compare the duration of analgesia of nalbuphine and fentanyl as adjuvants to intrathecal bupivacaine in patients undergoing infraumbilical surgeries. And the secondary objectives of our study is to compare the onset of sensory and motor blockade, as well as to compare the duration of sensory and motor blockade, and compare the hemodynamic changes and adverse events between the groups. We perform our study after getting approval from Institution Ethics Committee and then got the written informed consent from the participant. And this study is a double-blind randomized control trial. So we did a block randomization, and the blinding is done with both the anesthesiologists who performed the spinal anesthesia as well as the observer who observed the variables were blinded. And then the procedure is explained to the subject, all the participants. And then the following observations are recorded. There is the onset of sensory and motor blockade, as well as the duration of sensory and motor blockade, and then the duration of analgesia. That's the time between from the giving the spinal drug to the administration of first rescue analgesia. And all the subjects were monitored for heart rate, non-invasive blood pressure, oxygen saturation using pulse oximeter, temperature, and respiratory rate. And the adverse events like nausea, vomiting, pruritus, respiratory depression, hypotension, bradycardia are also monitored. This is the study design of our study. After getting an approval, we enrolled the subjects of 70 subjects who underwent the infraumbilical surgery, who is of 20 to 60 years of PSA 1 and 2 category. And then we randomized into two groups. Group A received 3 ml of hyperbaric bupivacaine with 1 milligram nalbuphine as an adjuvant, and the group B received 3 ml of hyperbaric bupivacaine with 25 microgram fentanyl citrate as an adjuvant, and both the groups received total drug volume of 3.5 ml. And we observed the following observation. There is the onset of sensory and motor blockade, duration of sensory and motor blockade, duration analgesia, hemodynamic changes, and adverse events. After obtaining the data, we perform the statistical analysis using SPSS software version 18. And for statistical analysis, the quantitative variables were expressed as mean and standard deviation, and the categorical variables were summarized as frequency and percentage. And for the calculation of duration of analgesia and other quantitative variables, we performed independent sample t-test, and for the association variables, we performed Pearson chi-square test, and the statistical significance taken at 5% level. These are the tools used for the observation. The duration of analgesia we performed using verbal numerical pain rating scale ranging from 0 to 10, and we administer rescue analgesia when the patient experiences pain score of more than or equal to 3, and the motor blockade assessment using modified Bromley scale, and the sedations assessed using Ramsey sedation score. Now I am going to show the result of the study. Here the mean data is expressed in the x-axis, and the blue color represents the data from the group A, and the red color represents the data from the group B. Here the upper part is the demographic profile. The age, height, weight, and duration of surgery were comparable between the groups. The lower part of the graph is the sensory block onset time, which was significantly lower in patients receiving nalbuphine with a statistical significance of p-value 0.046, whereas the motor blockade onset time was comparable between the groups. The duration of analgesia, which was 55 minutes longer in patients receiving nalbuphine with a statistical significance of 0.001. Similarly, the duration of sensory blockade was also 77 minutes longer in patients receiving nalbuphine with a statistical significance of 0.001. And the duration of motor blockade was 28 minutes longer in patients receiving nalbuphine with a statistical significance of 0.007. Now I am showing the hemodynamic changes between the groups. Here the heart rate, mean arterial pressure, and respiratory rate we monitored for 3 hours from the onset of spinal anesthesia, which were comparable between the groups. These are the adverse events. Here the nausea, vomiting, and pruritus incidents were significantly higher in patients received fentanyl than the nalbuphine with the statistical significance of less than 0.05, whereas the other adverse events like hypotension, bradycardia, and shivering were comparable between the groups. So with these results, we conclude nalbuphine is a better adjuvant to hyperbaric bupivacaine in spinal anesthesia than fentanyl, as it significantly prolongs the duration of analgesia, duration of motor blockade, and sensory blockade. And also nalbuphine has less adverse events than fentanyl with a comparable hemodynamic stability. Thank you.
Over to judges, Dr. Nibedita ma'am and Dr. Vandana ma'am. Ma'am, unmute. Vandana, unmute.
Yeah. So, Dr. Sona, I was wondering what made you do this study, because these facts are already well established. We have enough literature available and they have almost come into regular practice. So what made you decide on this study?
Yes, ma'am. In our institution, we commonly use fentanyl as adjuncts to intrathecal bupivacaine in patients usually undergoing spinal anesthesia. But I want. Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Hello. Yes, I am audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Hello. Yes,
Sona, you are audible.
In our institution, we commonly give fentanyl as a adjunct to intrathecal bupivacaine in infraumbilical surgeries. But in institutions where there is no narcotic licensing, this the nalbuphine, which has a longer duration of analgesia, so we can better use this nalbuphine as an adjunct than fentanyl, and also having it has less abuse potential and also less immune-mediated adverse effects.
So in what patients, in what surgeries did you give these drugs?
We took the open inguinal herniaplasty and also vaginal hysterectomy.
So what were the level of sensory analgesia that you achieved with these drugs?
We achieved a T6 level.
T6 level. So you think you required a T6 level? You required that higher level? In a vaginal hysterectomy, firstly, vaginal hysterectomy and inguinal hernia, you think they are comparable surgeries? In terms of post-op analgesia?
Most of the time we found the duration of analgesia were comparable. and then the
No, but the
patient's,
type of surgery is not comparable. The type of surgery, the pain after a vaginal hysterectomy and pain after an inguinal hernia will be totally different.
yes,
It
ma'am,
would not be. So your groups were not comparable. Your surgeries were not comparable. So then
yes,
your results cannot be comparable.
I do agree, ma'am, but for the average, the number of surgeries we took in one group is almost equal number. So
then you should have made 4 groups and compared the 2 groups amongst the 2 groups of surgeries. But if you compare randomly amongst both 2 different surgeries, I don't think it's an acceptable idea. Your results are not acceptable. Okay, you are a third year PG, but you should be able to design your study better next time. The surgeries should be comparable. Because the post-op pain in inguinal hernia will not be so much. A patient with vaginal hysterectomy will be in extreme distress. Even slight pain will give her a lot of discomfort, right?
But with the post-operative requirement of analgesia were comparable.
How can you compare, madam? That is what I'm trying to say. You're not understanding the point. Go ask your guide. Go ask your guide. Tell them that the judges were saying the surgeries were not comparable. She'll make you understand. Here we are short of time. Over to Madam Nivedita Pandit.
Can you tell me what is the role, how nalbuphine acts in the post-op analgesia? What is the physiology?
Nalbuphine, it acts through the kappa receptor mediated action. So it reduces the release of substance P, which is a nociceptive modulation. And this is the main action, analgesic action of nalbuphine.
So how it acts is, how it prolongs. Why is it studied to put in the bupivacaine to prolong the duration of surgery? How it acts, what is the role, how it prolongs?
It inhibits the release of nociceptive modulators, the neurotransmitters. So it's an additive action with the bupivacaine.
Thank you. Thank you, Nivedita ma'am, Vandana ma'am, and Dr. Sona.
Yes, ma'am.
Next, we have with us Dr. Fahida. Dr. Fahida, please unmute yourself. Share your screen.
Ma'am, wait 1 second.
Yes, share your screen.
Share.
Organizers, if it is delayed, can you go to next? You can prepare.
Dr. Jinu.
Dr.
Jinu join.
Organizers.
Yes, Dr. Jinu join.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you present?
Yes, sure, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
You can. Judges, please note this is Dr. Jinu.
Organizers, I think we are going to number 5 now, no?
Yes, judges, please note now the number 5, Dr. Jinu.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, ma'am. Shall I start?
And your time starts now.
Okay. Good afternoon. A comparative study of 3 different endotracheal cuff inflation techniques on post-operative laryngotracheal morbidity, a longitudinal study. Endotracheal cuff, it performs a critical function of sealing the airway during positive pressure ventilation. A narrow range of cuff pressure is required to maintain a functionally safe seal without exceeding the capillary pressure. The ideal cuff pressure most recommend a target of 20 to 30 centimeters of water. Despite the use of a high volume and a low pressure cuff, patients still remain at risk for cuff-induced laryngotracheal morbidity, even with short duration anesthesia. The main symptom reported after tracheal intubation is sore throat. One of the common practice for anesthetists is to palpate the external balloon contiguous with the cuff to obtain a rough estimation of the intracuff pressure, but it often results in unnecessary high intracuff pressure with consequent laryngotracheal complaints. The aim of my study is to compare the post-operative laryngotracheal morbidity on endotracheal cuff inflation techniques and to assess the incidence of post-intubation airway complications among patients intubated by stethoscope-guided method, constant pressure method, and the just seal method. The study was conducted in Amila Institute of Medical Sciences over a period of 18 months. It was a longitudinal study. It was conducted over patients who were undergoing elective surgeries under general anesthesia of less than 180 minutes duration, of age group 18 to 60 years, of ASA class 1 and 2. Informed written consent were taken from these patients. We excluded patients undergoing head and neck surgery, patients with tracheostomy, more than 2 attempts at intubation, where we are anticipating a difficult airway, use of nasogastric tubes or throat packs, and patients with an upper respiratory tract infection. The sample size was 18 in each group, total of 54 patients. Consecutive sampling method was used, and a performer was used as a study tool. On arrival to the theatre, standard monitors were attached, ECG, pulse oximeter, NIBP, baseline vitals were noted. We pre-medicated the patient with IV midazolam, IV ondansetron, and fentanyl 2 max per kg. Glycopyrrolate was not used in my study because it causes dryness of mouth, which could be a confounding factor in my study. We induced the patient with propofol 2 mg per kg, and neuromuscular relaxant was attained with vecuronium 0.1 mg per kg. Endotracheal cuff of high volume and low pressure were used with an internal diameter of 7 mm in females and 8 mm in males. Computer-based randomization was done, divided into 3 groups, that is a just seal group, constant pressure group, and the stethoscope guided group. In the just seal group, the ETT cuff is inflated until the sealing pressure, until no leak is heard. In the stethoscope guided group, the bell attachment of the stethoscope was used to auscultate over the thyroid cartilage lamina, and air was introduced from a calibrated syringe into the tracheal cuff until that harsh, turbulent breath sounds were replaced by a soft with sound. In the constant pressure group, the ETT cuff was aspirated as much as possible and it was inflated with air to achieve a cuff pressure of 25 centimeters of water on the manometer. Ventilation was controlled. Maintenance with IV plus inhalational oxygen nitrous oxide mixture was used and sevoflurane to a MAC of 1. End-tidal carbon dioxide was maintained between 30 to 35 millimeters of mercury and oxygen saturation more than 95%. Since we used oxygen nitrous oxide mixture, a cuff pressure was periodically monitored and a constant baseline pressure was maintained. The patient was extubated once extubation criteria was met. Post-operatively, the patient was monitored for 24 hours. We looked for cough, degree of sore throat, hoarseness, dysphonia, hemodynamic variables, post-operative nausea and vomiting. These were monitored 1 hour, 6 hours, and 24 hours post-operatively. The severity of sore throat was assessed by the numerical rating scale and the Von Baker Faces scale. The data was analyzed in the Excel worksheet using SPSS 23. Normality of the data was tested by the Shapiro-Wilk test, continuous variables with ANOVA test and the Kruskal Wallis test, and the categorized variables by the chi-square test. As you can see here, the incidence of sore throat at 1 hour and 6 hours post-operatively was found to be significantly high in the just seal group, and it was very minimal with the stethoscope guided method. Similarly, the incidence of cough at 1 hour post-operatively was found to be high in the Just Seal group. And the incidence of restlessness and the post-operative nausea vomiting were found to be significantly high in the Just Seal group. And the minimal occlusive volume that was found to be very high in the Just Seal group. The mean was somewhere around 6.84 and it was minimal with the stethoscope guided method. And the intracuff pressure, it ranged between 30 to 39 centimeters of water in the Just Seal group. All three groups were comparable with respect to the demographic data and duration of surgery. Hemodynamically, no significant difference was noted in three groups. No incidence of dysphonia, no significant difference noted with respect to spontaneous ventilation time. What we found is that the cuff pressure was found to be higher in the Just Seal group. The incidence of sore throat and the severity of sore throat, both were found to be higher in the Just Seal group. The incidence of cough, post-operative nausea, vomiting.
1 minute left. 1 minute left.
And restlessness was found to be higher in the Just Seal group. And hoarseness was noted in one of the patients in Just Seal group. To conclude, endotracheal cuff inflation by stethoscope guided method, it resulted in lower intracuff pressures, which significantly lowered the incidence of post-operative sore throat and cough. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges, Dr. Kannan and Dr. Sudesh Kannan.
How do you assess? How do you select your patients for your group? Randomize your patients.
So we used a computer-based random selection.
Yes. And who is the person who assessed this in the post-operative? You or some of you?
Someone who assisted post-operative.
In other words, how do you blind this patient?
Sir, it was not a double-blinded study because I was there with the patient throughout the procedure.
Then what is the instrument you use to measure your cuff pressure?
So we had an aneroid manometer, which is available in our theater. I used that to measure the cuff pressure.
Aneroid manometer that generally we use for blood pressure measuring?
Sir, yeah, it is in millimeters of mercury, but I converted it into centimeters of water.
So that will not be so sensitive.
Yes, sir. That is. Yes, sir. That is one of my limitations of this study.
So you never expressed it.
Yes, sir. That and prior to extubation also, the suction was not standardized. Suction was also not standardized.
These limitations in your slides.
Yes, sir. I understood. Yes, sir.
Yes. Over.
Hello. Can I? Yes. What is the parameter you took for calculation of sample size for your study?
So there was I didn't find much about literature on comparing the three different endotracheal cuff inflation techniques. There was one research which showed comparing between the Just Seal and the stethoscope guided method. So from there, I calculated sample size and the power was 80% and it came around to be 18 in each group.
Now, what I'm asking is, what is the parameter you selected? Whether the cuff pressure or is it something else? What is the objective parameter? What is the effect size you assumed to calculate the sample size?
So it was a incidence of sore throat and incidence of sore throat in both the groups, Just Seal group and the stethoscope guided method.
Okay, yeah. You are telling that you are comparing three groups, isn't it? One is Just Seal, stethoscope, as well as the other one is capillary refill.
Constant pressure method. Yes, sir.
Constant pressure. But in all of the results, I don't know whether you had mentioned those things. Was it depicted in the results?
Yes, I have mentioned in the results.
Okay, but there was no, I mean, you mean to say that only the stethoscope method gives you the best results when compared to constant pressure also?
Sir, but not in every variable, sir. In some variables, I found a few mismatch. Like in case of restlessness and post-operative nausea vomiting, I found the incidence quite high in stethoscope guided method. So there it was not statistically significant. Okay.
So that means, no, but post-operative restless and nausea vomiting, they have so many other factors which can influence, isn't it? So it's not only the this one. So it might not be a proper factor. I mean, this might be only one factor which can affect the
yes, sir. I understand, sir.
Right. So, okay. So these are, okay. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Kannan and Dr. Sudesh. And thank you, Jinu. Judges, please note, next we have Avanti 6, serial number 6.
Organizers, what about the 4, serial number 4? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Fahida, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. Share.
Judges, please note, this is serial number 4, Dr. Fahida.
Good morning, ma'am. My study is on preoperative nebulizer. Yes, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Your time starts now.
Good morning, ma'am. My study is on preoperative nebulization with ketamine versus budesonide in reducing postoperative sore throat in thyroidectomy, a prospective cohort study. Postoperative sore throat is a common clinical problem after thyroid surgery. Incidence is 21 to 65%. Movement of the tube and cuff in trachea at the time of positioning and manipulation are the factors responsible. There are various pharmacological as well as non-pharmacological methods to attenuate postoperative sore throat, and the pharmacological methods include nebulization with budesonide or ketamine, gargling with ketamine, local spray with lignocaine, intracuff administration of lignocaine jelly. Primary objective is to compare the effect of ketamine and budesonide nebulization on reducing the incidence and severity of postoperative sore throat in adult patients undergoing elective thyroidectomy. And the secondary objective is to observe the occurrence of adverse effects in either groups, if any. It's a prospective observational cohort study conducted in 120 patients in the Department of Anesthesiology, Government Medical College, Kozhikode, from a duration January 2019 to December 2019. Included patients with ASA physical status 1 to 2, age group of 20 to 60 years, elective thyroidectomy with endotracheal intubation, and duration of surgery ranging from 1 to 2 hours. Excluded patients with history of recent sore throat, anticipated difficult airway, non-allergies to study drugs, recent NSAID medications, those who required more than one attempt at intubation, and patients with nasogastric tube. After obtaining institutional ethic committee clearance and research committee approval, and after obtaining an written informed consent, 120 patients posted for elective thyroidectomy were divided into 2 groups, 60 of each. Group B, budesonide group was nebulized with 1 ml budesonide, 250 mics with 4 ml NS, and Group K, the ketamine group, was nebulized with 1 ml ketamine, 50 mg, 4 ml NS. 10 minutes prior to induction, each group received a nebulization for a period of 15 minutes. Pre-medicate the patient with fentanyl injection 1 mics per kg IV and injection midazolam 0.01 mg per kg IV. Anesthesia was induced with propofol injection 2 mg per kg IV and injection vecuronium 0.1 mg per kg IV, and after giving Silocan 1.5 mg per kg IV. Endotracheal intubation was done with the help of a senior anesthesiologist, and the cuff pressure was maintained around 20 centimeter water. At the end of surgery, oropharynx was gently suctioned and the patient was reversed with injection neostigmine 50 mics per kg IV and injection glycopyrrolate 10 mics per kg IV. Sore throat assessment was done on arrival 2 hours, 4 hours, and 24 hours postoperatively. Postoperative sore throat grading, it's a 4-point scale. 0 means no sore throat, 1 mild sore throat, that is complaints of sore throat on asking, 2 moderate sore throat, complaints of sore throat on his or her own, 3 severe sore throat, that is change of voice or hoarseness associated with throat pain. The statistical analysis was done with students t-test for continuous variables and for qualitative variables chi-square test, and was considered significant if the p-value is less than 0.05. Incidence of sore throat was lesser in the group budesonide 33% when compared to group ketamine, which was 70%, and the study is significant with a p-value of 0.002. Incidence was sore throat was lower in the budesonide group, and there was no incidence of adverse effects noted. A study cites the beneficial effects of nebulized corticosteroids in decreasing the incidence and severity of postoperative sore throat. Budesonide inhalation suspension prior to induction helps in reducing postoperative sore throat without any adverse effects. As a study by Ahuja et al., postoperative sore throat incidence, which was 20% in the ketamine group and 46% in the saline group, showing no adverse effects. Another study by Shen et al., showing postoperative sore throat incidence 37% in the budesonide group and 80% in the saline group without any adverse effects. Concluding, administration of budesonide nebulization prior to intubation significantly prevent and reduce the occurrence of postoperative sore throat when compared to ketamine nebulization in patients undergoing thyroid surgery. And my references are Ahuja et al. Nebulized ketamine decreases the incidence and severity of postoperative sore throat. Shen et al. Prophylactic effectiveness of budesonide inhalation in reducing postoperative sore throat complaints. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges, Dr. Nivedita ma'am and Dr. Mangala ma'am.
Doctor, you have conducted the study a prospective randomized cohort study. What do you mean by that?
It's an observational cohort study, prospective observational cohort study.
What do you mean by that?
There is the exposure to outcome. We selected 120 patients and we checked for the postoperative sore throat.
Madam, can you tell me this? Why you have conducted this prospective? So after you have conducted the study, will you take whatever the study you have taken? Will you follow it up or not?
Yes, I have followed it up.
How you have followed it up?
Postoperative sore throat based on 0, 2 hours and 4 hours, 24 hours postoperatively it was assessed.
So it is a prospective study. What do you mean by prospective study?
It's a, forward-looking study.
So once the patient has gone, so will you take into consideration, or during this period you will take into the consideration?
I will take it in consideration.
Are you clear what I'm asking you?
Ma'am?
This is a prospective study. So what do you mean by that? Anyway, next question.
Okay. I wanted to ask that you think, I wonder that you have taken budesonide and ketamine. So
Yes,
you
ma'am.
think the drugs are comparable?
Yes, ma'am.
How?
Both have anti-inflammatory property.
Ketamine also has anti-inflammatory property.
Yes, ma'am. Ketamine also has anti-inflammatory property. That's why I took this into my study.
Okay. Madam Pani, you want?
That if ketamine you will use it, do you feel there will be any sympathetic stimulation will be there by the local observation?
Madam, there has been no study, no side effects as quoted from my parent study, Vanida Ehja et al. As per my study also, there was no evidence of side effects reported.
Ketamine can be locally observed also. You know, orally it is given to the pediatric patient also.
Yes, but in my parent study, there has been no side effects reported, as well as in my study also, no incidence of side effects were noted.
Can you take into the consideration about the hemodynamics or not?
Yes, madam. I have taken into consideration the hemodynamics pre and post-op, and it was not statistically significant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, judges, and thank you, Vice.
Thank you.
Next, we have with us Dr. Avanti. Judges, please note 6, serial number 6, Dr. Avanti. Dr. Avanti, please share your screen.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, Avanti, you're audible.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Go to the presentation mode.
Yeah.
And your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. The title of my study is Safety and Ease of Awake Fiber Optic Intubation Using Oxygen Insufflation versus Suction to Clear Secretions During the Procedure. Awake fiber optic intubation is the gold standard for securing a difficult airway. And normally, to clear secretions, suctioning is done through the upper port of the bronchoscope. we hypothesized that insufflation with a high flow oxygen at 6 liters per minute as intermittent jets will help to clear the secretions by blowing it away. And this way, it provides an additional advantage of oxygen supplementation during the procedure. This protects against hypoxia, especially when sedative premedication is used. Several studies have also shown that using sedatives for the procedure improves the success rate as well as the patient comfort. My primary objective was to assess the safety of awake fiber optic intubation with use of suction versus oxygen insufflation to clear secretions as assessed by incidence of desaturation to less than 95%. My secondary objectives include comparison among both groups on assessment of ease of intubation, number of attempts at intubation, time taken to secure the airway, which is from introduction of the bronchoscope into the nostril till appearance of EtCO2 waveform, need of suctioning while using the insufflation technique, hemodynamic changes, and patient comfort and level of sedation with both techniques. My study was a prospective randomized open label study, which was conducted after obtaining the Institutional Ethics Committee clearance and patient's consent. It was also registered with the Clinical Trials Registry of India. My inclusion criteria were patients aged between 20 to 70 years of ASA physical status 1, 2, and 3 with difficult airway requiring. Exclusion criteria were all patients with known allergy to local anesthetics, major cardiac or pulmonary disorders, uncooperative patients, and patients with disease along the passage of fiber optic bronchoscope. Since no similar study was available, we conducted a pilot study in 20 patients, and the saturation of more than 95% during the procedure was maintained with 100% of the patients in the O2 group, whereas only 60% of the patients maintained the same in the suction group. Based on this result, with 95% confidence interval and 80% power, sample size was calculated to 19 per group. We recruited a total of 40 patients. All the patients were randomly allocated by computer-generated random sequence to either group S or group O. All patients received IV glycopyrrolate of 0.2 milligram plus dexmedetomidine of 0.5 microgram per kg over 10 minutes. And the more patent nostril was chosen. Oxymetazoline nasal drops were used for decongestion. Lignocaine 10% spray 2 puffs plus lignocaine 2% jelly was used to anesthetize the upper airway. And lignocaine 4% 4 ml was used as a transtracheal block. Group S, the suction tubing was attached to the upper port of the bronchoscope, whereas in Group O, oxygen at 6 liters per minute was connected to the same port. The bronchoscope was then advanced to the carina. An endotracheal tube of size 6.5 or 7 in females and males respectively was railroaded. On encountering secretions, the suction knob was activated, and in Group S, the secretions were suctioned out, whereas in Group O, the intermittent O2 jets helped to blow away the secretions. The image here shows the control section of the bronchoscope, where A is the upper suction port where either the suction tubing or the oxygen tubing was connected, and the lower working port remained closed throughout the procedure. Any patient with a saturation of less than 95% was supplemented with oxygen at 10 liters per minute via a face mask over the patient's mouth. The endotracheal tube placement was confirmed with EtCO2 waveform as well as auscultation. Following intubation, the patients were then induced and paralyzed and maintained with isoflurane, oxygen, and air mechanical ventilation. All anesthetists who performed the procedure had more than 5 years of experience in awake fiber optic intubation. In statistical analysis, normally distributed continuous variables were represented as mean and standard deviation, and skewed continuous variables as median with minimum and maximum values. All categorical variables were represented as proportions. Chi-square test, independent sample t-test, and Mann-Whitney test were applied as appropriate. Coming on to the results of my study, all mean demographic variables, gender, and ASA physical status were comparable between both the groups. My study showed significantly higher incidence of desaturation to less than 95% and need for oxygen supplementation in Group S, whereas the ease of intubation, the time taken to among both the groups. Coming on to the hemodynamic parameters, it was the mean heart rate and the mean arterial blood pressure were significantly higher during and 1 minute after intubation, whereas the heart rate remained significantly high even at 3 minutes after intubation. It was also noted that the number of times secretions had to be cleared was also significantly higher in Group S as compared to Group O. The O2 tubing was connected to the upper port of the bronchoscope because that way the insufflation can be controllable, intermittent, and hence safe. If it were to flow would be continuous and it would be independent of knob activation, and this can lead to a gastric distension. Thus, as a safety check, we recommend dipping the distal end of the bronchoscope in sterile water and activating the suction knob to note that bubbling in the case of oxygen and suctioning in the case of attaching suction tubing occurs only with activation and not otherwise. We recommend practicing this in normal airway before attempting it in a airway. If thick secretions are encountered, then suction tubing must be kept available and an assistant should readily disconnect the oxygen to attach suction. We in our study did not have to do the same. This additional time required to make this disconnection will definitely be well tolerated by an awake patient. Thus, I conclude that use of oxygen insertion awake fiber optic intubation is a safer alternative to suctioning, as this technique reduces the chance of desaturation during procedure without affecting ease of intubation, number of attempts, time taken, or patient comfort. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges, Dr. Kannan sir and Dr. Sudhir sir.
What are all the types of patients you have chosen for this awake intubation? What are all the types of surgery?
Yes, sir. All the patients we included were those undergoing head and neck reconstructive surgeries, having a cancer of the alveolus, anterior tongue, those with post-radiation trismus, etc. for reconstructive surgery, sir.
So in every group, there may be some number of patients who are dropped from the studies because of various other reasons. How many cases you are dropped from the study in both the groups?
Sir, we totally dropped 3 patients, sir.
You never mentioned all those things. It's also works out for the statistics.
Yes, so totally we had included 43 and we had to remove 3 patients because of patient refusal. But the other remaining...
While on the procedure, sometimes you may not be able to successfully, sometimes there may be secretions which may be obviously blocking everything. So you remove from the studies.
That we didn't have to do, sir.
Never such incident happened.
No, sir, it didn't happen with our study.
Yes. And you mentioned something about this local anesthesia spray or something like that for these patients?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What was that?
We used 2% lignocaine jelly in the nostril and as well as over the tube and the bronchoscope. Then we used 10% lignocaine spray as puffs to anesthetize the posterior pharyngeal wall, and transtracheal block also with 4% lignocaine.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. You were discussing about the oxygen insufflation technique, isn't it?
Yes.
So
sir.
what are the benefits of this technique? Why did you select this kind of a study?
We noticed that there is a certain incidence of desaturation that occurs during the procedure. So in order to provide a safety period during this procedure, especially in this case of difficult airway, then the time taken to intubate will affect the safe apnea time that we have with pre-oxygenation. So we wanted to see if this helps to improve that profile and whether incidence of desaturation can be avoided in the use of oxygen.
Actually, there are already some techniques available where they are insufflating oxygen using high flow, isn't it? When such standard techniques are there, what is the additional benefit what you are going to give? Here, actually, you are losing one port. The suction port you are losing because you are insufflating oxygen there, isn't it? So what is the additional benefit you are getting by doing this particular technique?
Sir, in this case, when we are providing it through the bronchoscope, then that way it's intermittent. So we avoid the risk of any gastric distension and we don't, in the case of other techniques where we provide oxygen as well, like in the case of Thrive, etc., then that would be that using a nasal cannula will also be needed. And that equipment will be an additional equipment. Here, in the case of bronchoscope, we can advance it nasally. And that way we have the patency of the nasal passage as well for the procedure.
Okay. Now, the other thing what I wanted to ask was, these you are using as a technique for drying out or drowning the, blowing out the secretions.
Yes, sir.
Aren't you actually inserting the secretions into the lungs? By doing that, is it a potential for infection?
Yes, sir. That here, what we are doing is when we encounter secretions is only up to the level of the glottis. So wherever we need to blow away secretions usually occurs in the oral or lower pharynx. So it does not go into the bronchus. We are not entering beyond the bronchus. We are not clearing the secretions because this is only for the
Judges, please
purpose of
note.
intubation.
Judges, we are lagging the time.
Okay, fine. But actually, you are still there's a potential that you're pushing that secretions into the lung. It doesn't mean that your glottis is.
That do occur.
Yes.
That do occur.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That is a dangerous situation.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, judges. Thank you, Avanti.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have with us Dr. Juby Matthew.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Yes, please share the screen.
Yes, ma'am. Hello. Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Can I start the slideshow, ma'am?
Yes,
Am I
slideshow.
audible?
Yes, you are audible. Slideshow. And your time starts now.
Good afternoon, all. My paper is on patterns of disposition patients following major head and neck reconstructive surgery. My primary objective was to study the nature of disposition of patients following major head and neck reconstructive surgery at 3 months postoperatively. My secondary objectives were to study the effects of hypoalbuminemia, hyponatremia, hypotension, hypothermia, blood transfusions, resurgery, and duration of ICU and hospital stay on various disposition levels. Term disposition refers to level of care to which patient gets discharged from hospital after surgery. We had assumed that preoperative status and occurrence of intraoperative adverse events may have an impact on postoperative disposition. Ours was a prospective observational study conducted over a period of 2 years, and a total of 260 patients were recruited. All patients coming for major head and neck reconstructive surgery were included in the study, but age less than 18 years and those patients who we could not be followed up were excluded. When a patient getting admitted for a major head and neck surgery, after getting a consent, detailed history was taken, and normal levels of serum sodium and serum albumin were taken as 136 to 145 and 3.5 to 5.2 according to our hospital lab standards. When there was more than 20% reduction of mean arterial pressure, which required an infusion of inotrope, was taken as hypotension in my study. And temperature less than 36 degrees Celsius was taken as hypothermia. Need for intraoperative blood transfusions were noted, and total number of days in ICU and hospital were also noted. Various disposition levels in my study were categorized as level 1 to 5, where level 1 is the best level of disposition, whereas level 5 is the worst one. In level 5, all patients were at home at 3 months who were able to look after by a family member, whereas level 2 patients required a skilled nursing facility. In level 3, in addition to skilled nursing facility, intermittent physician visits were also needed. In level 4, it was almost like a tertiary care where long-term acute care facility was provided. All patients who had expired during the study period were categorized as level 5. Categorical variables were analyzed with chi-square test, whereas continuous variables were analyzed with one-way ANOVA test. My results were mean age in my study was 55 years and mean duration of surgery was around 7 hours. Of the total 260 patients we had recruited, 45 had lost follow-up. Various reasons for lost follow-up were wrong contact number, patient did not pick up the phone, language problem, and their inability to explain about the disposition details. Of the 250 patients we had followed up, most of them got discharged to home, that is constitute 64.7%, whereas disposition to level 2 to 4 were 14%, 6.5%, and 6.4% respectively. A total of 18 patients died during the study period. This slide shows the effect of normal and low preoperative serum albumin on disposition. When we had categorized the patients into 5 levels, some characteristics for the chi-square analysis could not be. So we had combined the middle levels, that is level 2 to 4 we had combined, and then we applied the chi-square test. And we found that it is statistically significant. That is, when there was low albumin, there was higher level of disposition. Effect of normal and low sodium, low preoperative serum sodium was also evaluated, and that also show if the patient happened to be in low sodium group, there was a higher levels of disposition. If there was occurrence of sustained hypotension which required an infusion of that ionodrop, patient found to have disposed to a worse level of disposition. In my study, most of the patients had hypothermia. More than 85% patients had hypothermia. But when we analyzed for the there was no significant association found between hypothermia and disposition levels. Effect of intraoperative blood transfusion also showed a similar effect. That is, they had a higher level disposition if they happened to transfuse one blood intraoperatively. Effect of resurgery also had a worse disposition. And mean stay in ICU were also comparable, and we had found that in beds level, that is when the patient got discharged to home, mean ICU stay were around 4 days, but more than 10 days of ICU stay were required when patient got disposed to a higher levels. Longer hospital stay also shown to have higher levels of disposition. The importance of my study is that proper preoperative assessment and optimization is required for before any major surgery. We had seen that higher disposition actually points to a poor prognosis, and it have a social and financial impact as well as a burden. Proper correction of hypoalbuminemia, hypoanatremia prior to surgeries had seen to have better levels of disposition. And if we could able to correct anemia prior to surgery and use methods to reduce blood loss, there was requirement for intraoperative transfusions can be reduced, and use of continuous infusion of inotropics can also be avoided. And we had found that if there was hypotension, sustained hypotension, decreased end organ perfusion will be there and caused organ damage also. In our study, hypothermia was not found to be significant, but it have its own prevalence in patterns of disposition. In our study also, concurrent correction attempts were ongoing prior to surgery, but a lack of proper optimization was mainly due to the advanced malignancies and thus the semi-emergent nature of surgeries. I conclude that lack of proper preoperative optimization and occurrence of any adverse perioperative events have a negative impact on nature of disposition in patients following major head and neck reconstructive surgeries. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges. Vandana ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So what is the level of optimization you think you should do, and what should be the time spent in optimization? Because surgery for malignancy is considered to be almost equivalent to an emergent surgery. So
Yes,
what do you think should be the time spent in optimizing these patients?
Actually, as soon as we usually get the patient's details, once only if a patient getting posted for a surgery, ma. So when we at the first visit to the pre-anesthesia clinic itself, we started optimizing, ma. If we found that if we could correlate with the OPD patients, then we could do a better optimization that we could not do in our study. Towards the after some time, we had noticed like this, and we tried to optimize from the OPD level itself. But what we had practically did in most of the cases where after coming to pre-anesthesia clinic only we could able to manage the patient. That was the one time that we could say, ma'am, because even though it's malignancy, there should be some schedule for the surgery. So if we get the patient early, we may have managed optimally even with more time, ma'am.
So my question is, usually what time you took to optimize? What time you got to optimize?
We had almost
how many days or weeks?
Almost all patients we had less than a week, ma'am. Nearly 4 days only we got.
And okay, so you could not optimize all your patients.
Ma'am, near optimization was done, but still majorly due to some chronic malnutrition, all these patients had major airway related problems, ma'am. And when it came also, we had taken it for the second time surgery or something. Maybe before my study start. So already patient have been maybe malnourished. That's why we have evaluated albumin also. So feeding techniques may not be adequate. That was the main problem. Those we can do that sodium corrections and anemia corrections we had done before the study itself.
You have not corrected the hypoalbuminemia before surgery.
We haven't transfused our side. We haven't tried to transfuse albumin prior to surgery. But intraoperatively, we had actually seen how many patients required some transfusion of albumin, but we had very minimal number in that, ma'am. So we could not taken that into the study for the analysis. Though we had a very big number, when it comes to different levels, the numbers were really inadequate, ma'am.
So I think this would extrapolate to other malignancies also and other patients also. So you should educate your surgeons about it, about your outcomes, so that they would take interest in optimizing the patients before they pose them for surgery. This is an interesting piece of study you've done, and it should change the system of working in your institution and other places.
Actually, towards end of the study, we had did that. We correlated with the team and head and neck team, and we tried to implement that, ma'am.
Yeah. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you, ma'am.
Thank
One question.
Yes,
when
ma'am.
you started this study?
Ma'am.
You are in third year?
Yeah, ma'am. I'm third year now, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. I'm third year, ma'am.
When you started this study?
Ma'am, I joined for course in May 2000. Ma'am, that is it. I started my course in May 2018, ma'am. I had started my study from September to August 2018 and follow up till last June end. So it was like a duration of two years, but I just made one call at the end of 3 months to inquire whether where is the patient. Just that I had made. All other
Judges, please note, we are lagging the time.
Sorry, ma'am, I could not hear you. Ma'am?
Do you find any difficulty while contacting the patient?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We had so many difficulties. One thing is our center is actually in the South India itself. We have a lot of patients coming from Mali and other states also. I had a lot of language problems, wrong contact numbers. That's why there is a big loss follow-up, ma'am. 45 patients among the 260 had lost follow-up.
Madam, you just mentioned in your study how much you have you could not contact and what was the
Judges,
problem?
Yeah, we are lagging the time.
Ma'am, I could not understand. Sorry, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
Next.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Juby, and thank you, judges. We have next with us Dr. Binsi. Dr. Binsi, please share your screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Go to the presentation mode.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you're audible. And your time starts now.
Good afternoon to all. Myself, Dr. Binsi Joseph, DNB resident from Lourdes Hospital, Cochin, presenting my single-blind randomized study titled Anesthetic Effect of Opioid-Free Anesthesia with Erector Spinal Plane Block versus Opioid Anesthesia for Modified Radical Mastectomy. Breast cancer surgery is routinely done under opioid-based anesthesia, most of the time associated with increased postoperative pain and opioid-related side effects. As we all know, we are moving into the era of opioid-free anesthesia with the help of many alternative techniques. Among these, a newer interfacial plane block, erector spinal plane block, which is less adverse effect and it is technically simple one. So in my study, my aim was to compare the anesthetic effect of opioid-free anesthesia with erector spinal plane block versus opioid-free anesthesia, opioid-based anesthesia for modified radical mastectomy. My primary objectives include to compare the duration of analgesia between the study group, to compare the pain score using numerical rating scale postoperatively for 24 hours, compare the total number of rescue analgesic requirement in 24 hours. The secondary objectives were to assess the sedation score postoperatively, assess the incidence of nausea and vomiting and look for any other side effect, and to assess the patient satisfaction at 24 hours postoperatively. The sample size was determined by the formula shown here with a significant level of 5% and a power of 80% based on a previous similar study done by Tripathi et al. And the sample size obtained was 55 per group. Inclusion criteria were AC122 patient, age between 25 to 65 years, weight of 50 to 70 kg. Patient with moderate to severe systemic disease, prior allergy to local anesthetic, history of postoperative nausea and vomiting, history of chronic pain, coagulopathies were excluded from our study. All the patients were randomized based on a computer-generated randomization table and allocated into two groups, Group A, that is the ESP group, and the Group B, that is the opioid group. No patient discontinued the interventions. All patients underwent a thorough pre-anesthetic evaluation and we obtained a written informed consent pre-medicated with the ranitidine and tapirino night before and on the day of surgery. In bio guidelines were followed. On the day of surgery, under standard ASC monitoring, Group A patient received USG guided ESP block at T5 level of the surgical site in sitting position. That was a single shot technique using 20 ml of 0.375% ropivacaine with 1 microgram per kilogram dexmedetomidine. After ensuring loss of sensation to pinprick from T1 to T8 area, general anesthesia was induced with the LMA without using any opioid. Group B patient received morphine 0.1 mg per kg based GA with endotracheal tube. No ESP block was given to the patient. 0 time was the block time or morphine administration time in the respective groups. At the end of surgery, Group B patient's LME was removed and Group B patient reversed and extubated. Post-operative assessment was done by the primary investigator who is blinded to the study. Postoperatively, when the patient complains of pain, injection paracetamol 1 gram was given. The duration of analgesia was noted from the 0 time. Tap paracetamol 650 milligram 8 hourly was given as the baseline analgesia. Injection ketorolac 30 mg IM was the rescue analgesia and total doses in 24 hours calculated. Postoperatively, patients were also assessed for NRS pain score, Ramsay sedation score, incidence of postoperative nausea, vomiting for 24 hours and patient satisfaction at 24 hours. This is the patient positioning for ESP block and you use the picture showing the ESP. In sitting position, we palpated the spinous process of C7 downward till the T5 spinous process and we placed a high frequency linear probe 3 cm lateral to the T5 spinous process and inserted a 22 gauge spinal needle superior to inferior in plane approach and we could recognize 3 muscles from outward. They are trapezius, rhomboides major and erector spinae muscle and we could deposited the local anesthetic in the deeper aspect of the erector spinae muscle above the T5 transverse process and we could see the craniocaudal spread of the local anesthetic. All the parameters were analyzed using appropriate statistical tools like unpaired t-test and chi-score test and the significant p-value was less than 0.05. The duration of analgesia was significantly prolonged in ESP group, that is around 8.1 hours compared to the opioid group, that is around 5.69 hours. There was a significant reduction of pain score at the recovery area 2nd, 4th and 6th hour postoperatively in the ESP group. Total number of rescue analgesic requirement, that is the dose of injection ketorolac in 24 hours was less in ESP group, that is around 0.75 than the opioid group, that is 1.45. Sedation score at recovery area and the 2nd hour postoperatively were reduced in ESP group than the opioid group. Incidence of postoperative nausea and vomiting was less in ESP group at 2nd, 4th and 6th hour postoperatively. No patients in the both group complaints about PONV at 0 hour, 12th hour and 24th hour. Patients were more satisfied at 24 hours because of less incidence of PONV and reduced pain score and there was no associated complication noted in the ESP group. In conclusion, patients who underwent MRM under opioid-free anesthesia along with erector spinae plane block had good quality of analgesia in terms of increased duration of analgesia, reduced rescue analgesic requirement, reduced pain score, less incidence of side effect related to opioids like PONV and sedation and better patient satisfaction. Hence, opioid-free anesthesia with ultrasound-guided erector spinae plane
1 minute
provide
left.
safe
1
and
minute
superior
left.
postoperative analgesia without the disadvantages of opioid. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Binsi. Over to judges, Dr. Kannan sir and Dr. Sudhir sir.
Dr. Benzi,
Yes.
in morphine group, what anti-emetic are we using?
We have given in the pre-anesthetic during the pre-anesthetic evaluation, we pre-medicated all the patient with ranitidine and tapirino night before and on the day of surgery.
Ranitidine
and perom in the pre-anesthetic evaluation. And prior to the surgery, we have given all the patient injection ondansetron 4 mg IV for all the patients.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Binsi, did you notice any problem while administering erector spinal block, whether it was done under awake state or
Sir,
whether it was awake or yeah?
Sir, we did ESP block in the sitting position prior to the induction. So we could, that was technically simple for the anesthetist and comfortable for the patient, and we could easily identify the 3 muscles and the transverse process.
Okay, I agree with the technique, but did you find any side effects or did you notice any problem with the erector spinal block?
Usually, ESP blocks are not associated with much more side effect. That is why it is safer and it is technically simple also. It is heavy. The ESP plane is heavy from the pleura, spinal cord, and the major vessels. So the side effect usually not seen with ESP block.
No, what are the potential side effects?
Potential side effect, there can be fail block, can be there, there can be vascular puncture or pneumothorax can be, rarely can occur.
I don't think so. You have noticed. Actually, it leads to a lot of hemodynamic problems, especially when you're administering the block. Okay, fine. Then what was the sample size parameter you used for calculating the sample size?
That is a numerical pain score based on a previous similar studies.
Based on pain score. Then what was your sample size?
55 per each group.
55. Then I think you could. What is the effect size? What you used?
Sir?
Or what is the difference between the 2 groups you?
Duration of analysis.
The difference between the 2 groups in the pain score. What is the difference between the the pain score between the 2 groups you used to calculate the sample size?
That is
because you calculate based on.
That is pain score was approximately 2 for the block group and around 3 for the morphine opioid group.
Standard group. Okay.
Standard group.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your study is basically. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, judges, and thank you, Binsi. Next, we have with us Ashish Suresh. Ashish Suresh, please share your screen. Presentation mode. Slideshow. And your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ashish Suresh, and I'm going to present the topic on the association between dorsolateral vertebral column length and abdominal girth with spread of intrathecal hyperbaric bupivacaine in elective lower section cesarean section. Spine anesthesia is typically used for non-emergent cesarean delivery. There are various drug, patient, and positional factors influencing block height. An extensive and rapidly ascending block level readily contributes to the high incidence of hypotension, increasing the risk of maternal complications and fetal anoxia, and hence it is vital to have more reliable predictors of block height. Objective to study the association between dorsolumbar vertebral column length and abdominal girth with spread of intrathecal hyperbaric bupivacaine in pregnant women undergoing elective LSCS. Methodology: a prospective observational study was undertaken in the Department of Anesthesiology, Government Medical College, Trivandrum. Duration of study was 1 year and study tool was based on a performer. Inclusion criteria included women of age group 19 to 35 years, term, singleton pregnancy, ASA PS class 1 and 2, height more than 150 centimeter, undergoing elective LSCS. Sample size was calculated from a study by Hartpilletta as 76. All consecutive patients meeting eligibility criteria was selected. Exposure variables: age, weight, height, BMI, gestation age, abdominal girth, and vertebral column length. Outcome variables: level of loss of pinprick sensation, blood pressure, and pulse rate. Methodology: PAC, informed written consent, and NPO were obtained. Co-loaded with 500 ml ringer lactate. Vertebral column length was measured from C7 vertebral prominence to the level of intercostal line, while the parturian was sitting with a straight back. Abdominal girth was measured at the level of umbilicus at the end of expiration. 2 ml of 0.5% hyperbaric bupivacaine was injected intrathecally with 25 gauge spinal needle at the L3 endpoint interspace in left lateral position. The cephalax rate was assessed at 1 minute intervals using loss of pinprick sensation with 18 gauge needle till T4 level was attained and surgery was started. Level of block was observed every 3 minutes for 12 minutes. Peak level of block was taken as a maximum level of block achieved in 12 minutes, which was equal to the total number of vertebral segments blocked from S5 to the peak level of block. Any hypotension was treated with IV ephedrine and bradycardia was treated with IV atropine. Data was entered in the Microsoft Excel. 7 predictors were used: age, weight, height, BMI, gestation age, abdominal girth, and vertebral column length. Minimum sample size calculated was 76. Data was presented as mean and median as appropriate and analyzed with IBM SPSS statistics software. Univariate correlations were determined using Pearson correlation. Multiple regression analysis was used to test which factors were the primary predictors. Value for R square, the multiple correlation coefficient, was obtained to show the degree of fit for the regression equation. Statistical significance was defined as p-value less than 0.05. Nevertheless, hypotension occurred in 34% and bradycardia occurred in 16%. There was no significant correlation between cephalad spread and age, weight, BMI, and gestation age. There was significant positive correlation between abdominal girth and loss of inferior sensation. As abdominal girth increased, cephalad spread increased. There was significant negative correlation between height and cephalad spread. As height decreased, cephalad spread decreased. There was significant negative correlation between vertebral column length and loss of inferior sensation. As vertebral column length decreased, the cephalad spread increased. Multiple linear regression analysis showed that abdominal girth and vertebral column length were the key determinants of spread. Adjusted R square was 0.767 for the regression equation. Coming to discussion, Carpenter et al. Showed that cephalad spread depends on the effective CSF volume. Increased IAP by the pregnant uterus caused a decreased effective CSF volume. Ni et al. Found that IAP and abdominal girth are linearly correlated. From our study, as abdominal girth increased, cephalad spread increased. Now, our study showed a greater correlation than a study done by B et al. With correlation coefficient 0.680 from our study versus 0.372 from B et al. Logic might suggest that there would be a smaller volume of lumbosacral CSF in patients with shorter vertebral column length. As per our study, as vertebral column length increased, the cephalad spread decreased. We had a stronger positive correlation between vertebral column length and cephalad spread compared to a study done by Hartwell et al. R.746 from our study versus 0.32 from Hartwell et al. Height seemed to have a negative correlation with cephalad spread, but multiple linear regression analysis showed that vertebral column length and abdominal girth were the key determinants. So et al. Showed that abdominal girth had greater correlation than vertebral column length with cephalad spread. Our study showed that vertebral column length had greater correlation than abdominal girth with cephalad spread of spine anesthesia. Compared to previous studies, which was done using combined spine epidural block, our study was used only single shot spine anesthesia. So it's a better reflection of the outcome. T4 level was attained in all our participants, but hypotension bradycardia developed in a significant number. Hence the need for individualized tailoring of bupivacaine dose and better predictors than the conventional one. Limitation: even with the established correlation between vertebral column length and abdominal girth with cephalad spread, a method to detect an accurate bupivacaine dosage individualized to the patient is yet undetermined. Although abdominal girth and vertebral column length are predictors of peak block height, the surgical anesthesia for the whole duration of such surgery doesn't depend solely on the peak block height. The anatomical landmarks for our study were not marked using imaging, so there might be subjective errors in the measurement of lengths. Conclusion: the study indicated that vertebral column length and abdominal girth have significant predictive value for the cephalad spread of spine anesthesia with hyperbaric bupivacaine in elective LSCS, term parturients with greater abdominal girth and shorter vertebral column length have a greater cephalad spread of spine anesthesia. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashi. Over to Judge Nivedita ma'am.
There are two categories of the patient will come with a short, one will be with a short stature, two persons with a short stature, one with little bit abdominal girth less and one with abdominal girth more. Where do you anticipate the cephalad spread to be more?
Yes, madam. So from our study, vertebral column length had greater correlation than abdominal girth, 0.746 versus 0.680. So I am expecting the parturient with shorter height, right? So I have to measure her vertebral column length. So from our study, from our regression analysis, we have seen that height doesn't have it. It was just a false correlation. So regression showed that vertebral column length had the correlation. So if she is 150 centimeter, the same part, another part, both parturients with 150 centimeter need not have the same vertebral column length. So I have to measure her vertebral column length and decide who should decide what I should give them.
One is a vertebral column length. Suppose it is 145. Another is also same 145. But the abdominal girth roundabout it is 38 and another is 40. So where do you expect the F-alert spreads to be more?
Both same vertebral column length, madam.
Yeah.
So that is also fixed, madam. So then only abdominal girth is the variable, right? So the one with more abdominal girth will have more spread. So all my factors are fixed. Yes, madam.
Okay. For conducting the study, you must be doing. Are you able to do with all the emergency patient?
Yes, madam. Yeah.
Measuring tape and everything. Do you find any discomfort while measuring?
No, madam. We have a Sri Avitan Tirunad SAT Department of Obstetric Gynecology. We have everything present there. I can comfortably do the study there, madam. In my college, we have everything for GA set.
Sort of patient with emergency with pain, and it will be difficult to sit down and measure abdominal girth and measurement. Do you find any difficulties for a patient?
No, madam. Actually, when we transfer the patient from trolley to this our table, I measure the vertebral column length, and as soon as then I leave the this measuring tape. I leave it there, and as soon as she lies down, I just measure. I ask her to expire, and then I measure the abdominal girth, so she doesn't have to move around, and I just take my tape out. So
all this patient, you have given cesarean section by the sitting or from the lateral position?
Lateral position only, madam. Left lateral position I have given. All patients left lateral only. That's what we follow, madam.
So you have not given anybody with sitting position?
No, madam.
Okay.
I mean, in the
Thank
study,
you.
no, madam.
Over to Bandana.
Judges, we are lagging the time.
Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, Nivedita, ma'am, and thank you, Ashi. Next, we have with us the last presentation by Niranjan. Niranjan, unmute.
Yeah.
Yes, please
Hello.
share your screen.
Yeah. Can you able to see, ma'am?
Yes, go
Yes.
to the presentation mode,
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
and your time starts now.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My paper presentation is on efficacy of ketofol in blunting adverse cardiovascular effects of propofol, its effects on intraoperative opioid requirements, and recovery profile when used as an induction agent. The primary objective of my study was to compare the changes in heart rate after induction of general anesthesia with propofol versus a combination of ketamine and propofol, which is ketofol. My secondary objectives were comparison of changes in mean arterial pressure, level of sedation at the time of extubation, emergence delirium at the end of surgery, intra, propofol and fentanyl consumption, number of interventions required for correcting hypo or hypertension. Background and rationale. Propofol is known to cause dose-dependent hypotension, whereas ketamine causes hypertension and tachycardia. If these both drugs are combined together, the hemodynamic side effects of both agents could be nullified. Study design, it was a prospective randomized single-blinded study. Inclusion criteria were age group between 18 to 60 years, ASA physical status 1 and 2, Mallampati score 1 and 2, surgeries lasting for 2 to 3 hours. Exclusion criteria were anticipated difficult airway, psychiatric and cardiovascular illness, history of emergence delirium following ketamine administration, or history of allergy to propofol and ketamine. Sample size, based on a previous study where heart rate was compared between a propofol and the ketofol group with 90% power and 99.9% confidence interval, the sample size came up to 8. However, we were able to recruit 30 cases in each group. After obtaining institutional ethical committee, the study was registered under Clinical Trials Registry of India. Methodology, following a thorough pre-anesthetic evaluation and keeping the patient on NPO for 6 hours, solid for 6 hours and clear liquids for 2 hours, randomization was done by computer-generated random sequence of number. Allocation concealment was ensured by sequentially numbered opaque sealed envelopes. An informed consent was taken. On the day of surgery in OR, IV access was secure and ringer lactate was started at 10 ml per kg. After pre-oxygenating the patient for 3 minutes, midazolam 2 mg followed by glycopyrrolate 0.2 mg and fentanyl 2 mics per kg was given. Group A patients received propofol 1.5 to 2.5 milligram per kg over 30 seconds till loss of response to verbal commands. Group B patients received ketamine 1 mg per kg followed by propofol till loss of response to verbal commands. And vecuronium 0.1 milligram per kg was given, and patient was mask ventilated with 1% isoflurane and oxygen. At 3 minutes, gentle and short laryngoscopy, not lasting for more than 15 seconds, was done, and patient was intubated. And anesthesia was maintained with isoflurane 1 to 1.5% and oxygen admixture 1:1. Reduction in mean arterial pressure more than 20% is considered as hypotension, and it was intervened by 250 ml fluid bolus initially. If it still was not responding, incremental phenylephrine doses about 50 microgram was given. Increase in heart rate did not respond or was associated with increase in the mean arterial pressure more than 20%. Isoflurane was increased to 2%, or as incremental boluses of fentanyl 0.5 microgram per kg to a maximum dose of 1 microgram per kg was given, considering that there was no inadequate analgesia. Statistical analysis. Categorical variables were presented as number and percentage. Continuous variables were presented as mean and standard deviation. Chi-square test, independent sample t-test, and paired t-test were used for statistical analysis. And SPSS version 20 was used. Results: age, weight, time taken for loss of response to verbal commands, gender, Mallampati score, and ASA physical status were comparable between the groups. Comparison of mean heart rate between the groups. At 3 minutes post-induction, the heart rate, there was a significant decrease in heart rate in propofol group compared to the ketofol group. And at 1 minute post-intubation, the heart rate there was a significant rise in heart rate in propofol group compared to the ketofol group. Comparison of mean arterial pressure between the groups, and at immediate post-induction and at 3 minutes post-induction, there was a significant decrease in mean arterial pressure in propofol group compared to the ketofol group. Whereas at 1 minute post-intubation, there was a significant rise in the mean arterial pressure in propofol group compared to the ketofol group. Total propofol consumption. Comparatively, in group A, which is propofol group, there was an increased propofol consumption. Similarly, the fentanyl consumption was also higher in group A, which is propofol group, compared to the ketofol group. Interventions with fluid boluses and interventions with vasopressors. Ramsay sedation score at 10 and 30 minutes post-extubation were comparable, and there was no emergence delirium in both the groups. Discussion. Propofol has a shorter duration of action and better emergence profile, but it causes profound hypotension and bradycardia following induction. Ketamine has the least potential of hypotension, but accelerated cardiovascular stimulant effects and emergence delirium are present. Based on the previous studies, many studies have been done where fixed doses of both the drugs have been used, but still there was persistent adverse cardiovascular events. But in our present study, we used ketamine 1 mg per kg followed by 1.3 milligram per kg of propofol till there is loss of response to verbal commands, and there was a better hemodynamics that we could able to see. Conclusion. Combining ketamine 1 milligram per kg to propofol for induction of general anesthesia resulted in attenuation of hypotensive and bradycardic responses of propofol. Ketofol effectively blunted hemodynamic responses to laryngoscopy and intubation, reduced intra-op opioid consumption with no added risks of excessive post-op sedation or emergence delirium. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges, Dr. Kannan and Dr. Sudhish.
Niranjan,
yes, sir.
How did you measure the blood pressure within a span of 1 minute,
Sorry,
2 minutes? How did you measure the blood pressure, which is the most important parameter for your study, within a minute,
yes,
and things like that? What is the technique you use?
Sir, we used NIBP, sir, for measurement, but it was like we had a gap of 3 minutes for each timelines. So
it is very difficult because 1 minute, 2 minutes with NIBP, sometimes it takes about 30 seconds, 40 seconds to measure. So I would rather suggest this type of studies should be done with the direct arterial pressure studies, because the parameters are the one that gives the results for you. In that case, measuring by NIBP will not give you cut to with this cuff and then the automatic measurement will not give you the accurate measurements what that is desired. That is my view. Probably your guide also will agree with that. Thank you.
Dr. Niranjan, you were talking about the results. You were actually mentioning about heart rate as one of the sample size calculation parameter, isn't it?
Sir.
That's how you are
Yes,
calculating.
sir. That was.
Do you think that so sample size is calculated based on the heart rate? Do you think that is applicable? You can extrapolate the same sample size to the other parameters also, or the sample size will be inadequate or excess?
Sir, we compared mean arterial pressure the previous study also, but then the sample size was inadequate, sir. It was very less. So we tried making a heart rate as a primary objective.
Okay. So that means, no, in that case, whatever observations you made regarding mean arterial pressure, regarding hospitals, I mean, the post-operative recovery score.
Yes, sir.
So
That was the
all those
secondary
results
objectives in
are,
the previous study.
yeah. No, what about your study? In
Yes,
your
sir.
study, is it a primary objective? They are all secondary
It's
objectives.
a secondary objective. Primary objective is
secondary
only
objective.
heart rate, sir. The other things are secondary objective. Mean arterial pressure, Ramsay sedation score is all secondary objective, sir.
So is the heart rate is an ideal thing for calculating the heart, this one? See, because you are talking about, what is the title of your study? Recovery profile, hemodynamic parameters. So you cannot have multiple parameters for one study. One of them has to be the primary outcome measure, and that has to be the main thing in your title.
Okay.
You cannot have multiple, like recovery profile and other things, everything. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So that is number one. And even if you consider heart rate, there was only one time, that is at the 3rd minute, which is showing statistical significance.
So third
right?
and 1 minute post intubation also, sir. That's where the maximum hemodynamic instability happens.
Is that clinically significant? Because statistically it is significant,
Yes, sir.
but is it clinically significant? Because ultimately, whatever study you do
Yes, sir.
is to see whether it is clinically applicable or clinically useful or not. So, isn't it? So that is also equally important. Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's the time between the intubation. The response to the intubation is blunted, no, sir. In case if it's post-intubation, heart rate is still lesser. That means like the ketofol group, post-intubation response is little bit less compared to the propofol group. It is bit stable, no, sir.
No, that is correct. But is it clinically valid? That's what I am trying to find out. Whether the difference in the heart rate, the change in the heart rate is clinically valid or not. That also you should analyze. Okay, not only statistically.
Yes.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all the participants and the judges. Judges, please note, please WhatsApp or mail to your scorecard to Dr. Sam Philip.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. By what time should we send it? Another 5-10 minutes, is it okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
What is his number or address, whatever it may be, Sam Phillips?
I'll post in the chat box, sir.
Yes.
Any other queries?
Nothing.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be the judge of this session. Thank you, Kannan sir. Thank you, Nibedita ma'am. Thank you, Vandana ma'am. It's nice being with you people. Thank you so much.
Really a wonderful experience.
Opportunity to see Navneeta after a long time.
Yeah, yes, sir. Otherwise, madam is so active. Nibedita ma'am.
Yes. Frequently, I see in all these WhatsApp group and other things.
Yes, sir.
So much.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Thank you.
Wonderful experience with you all. And after long, I'm seeing you all. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
And I must thank the organizer for giving us a beautiful opportunity. And really, all the papers are very nice. and very nicely done also, and very keen competition among all the papers.
Yeah, they were all
That's true,
presenting
that's
very
true.
well. Yes.
Yes, it is a keen competition. It's leaves us in a desperate situation. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Can we leave?
Yes, you can leave. Judges.